Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me at the B&H event space. How many of you are just escaping the cold out there of New York City and the snow? Anybody get snowed in yesterday? Yes. And you just like parlayed that into an extra day to come hang out at B&H? So how many of you are already using Lightroom? Wow, everybody. How many of you have created any frustrating problems for yourselves in Lightroom? So whenever I talk about Lightroom, I always have a few people at the end of the presentation who come up and tell me about the mess they've created for themselves and hoping that I can help them extricate themselves from that. And I've found that there tend to be a few recurring themes in terms of the types of issues that we create for ourselves, and they sort of fall into a handful of basic categories. One of those is kind of jumping in with both feet a little too quick, a little prematurely. Before you actually understand how Lightroom works, you dive in and just start playing with it. Some of it is not understanding that when you're using Lightroom to manage your images, you need to use Lightroom to manage your images, not something else. It's sort of it's a commitment, you might say. You're using Lightroom, you want to use Lightroom exclusively. So we'll talk about some of the pitfalls, some of the things that you might do or you might have done that can create problems in Lightroom, and more importantly, we'll talk about some of the solutions along the way. So the first thing I think that is important to understand about Lightroom is that Lightroom uses a central database, or what it refers to as a catalog. It's essentially an index. It's a file that contains all of the information about your photos. It doesn't contain your photos, it contains the information about your photos. Your photos exist separately from the Lightroom catalog. And that means that essentially you need to, in essence, keep track of two things. You need to keep track of your Lightroom catalog, keep it backed up, keep it safe, and you need to keep track of your photos. One of the common misconceptions is that once you've imported photos into Lightroom, you can just delete them off your hard drive because they're magically contained somewhere in Lightroom. That's not the case. Lightroom is staying organized about your photos. It's retaining all the information about your photos. Your photos still exist somewhere else. So let's talk about that catalog and how we actually might configure things when it comes to the catalog itself. If you're a Macintosh user, you can go to the Lightroom menu. For a Windows user, that will be on the Edit menu, and then we can choose Catalog Settings. There's also, for those that are so interested in all the nuanced little details, there's a button that will take you to the Catalog Settings dialog from directly inside of the Preferences dialog. So if you're configuring overall Lightroom preferences, there's a quick and easy way to get there. So some of this information we're not too terribly concerned with most of the time. But for example, on the General tab here, I can see the location of my catalog, the name of that catalog, the date that it was created, when I last backed it up. I should emphasize that all of the files that I'm using here today are just test files. They're duplicates, they're copies. This is not my real catalog that I'm working with. And that's why it hasn't been backed up so far. There's just a presentation catalog. And speaking of backing up, notice that we have an option down here to specify how frequently we want to back up. It's interesting, this might seem a little bit absurd initially. There's an option here to never back up your catalog. Like, this is the living dangerously option inside of Lightroom. And it might seem a little bit silly, but would you believe that when it comes to working inside of Lightroom, I never back up my catalog? I'm a risk taker. Not really. Not really. But I don't need to use Lightroom to back up my catalog because I already have another system in place that's backing up everything on a very regular basis, and so I don't need to make use of, it's very nice that it's here, but I don't need to make use of the built-in feature for backing up my catalog. But that said, paranoia, I think, is a good thing. At least it works really well for me. And so, backing up once a week or on whatever frequency makes sense for you. Part of this decision depends upon how much work you tend to do in Lightroom on a regular basis. If you're all day, every day spending lots of time with Lightroom, well, maybe you need to spend some more time going out and taking pictures, but you could back up every day. For me, weekly usually works just fine in theory, but again, I'm also backing up my computer literally every night, and so I've got a backup of that catalog every night. So it's not something that I generally worry about. The catalog itself, by the way, is not terribly large. The catalog itself, I have just shy of 300,000 photos in my Lightroom catalog. That catalog file is less than 3 gigabytes in size, which is, that's not tiny, but it's not huge. The previews file is something like 90 gigabytes, but that's a different matter. All right, so you can adjust those settings as you see fit. File handling, this we don't need to worry about too much for our purposes today, but note that we can, for example, adjust the size and quality of the previews that are used in, for example, the library module when we're working with our photos. So you can adjust that based on your display settings, for example. But most importantly, the real reason that I brought you to the catalog settings dialog is the metadata tab. And there are several options here that might theoretically be of some interest. But I'm not going to worry about all of them. I'm going to rush right to automatically write changes into XMP, which leads to the automatic question of what's an XMP? And why would I want to do this versus not do this? Notice that it's turned off by default, which might cause you to believe that it's something that Adobe recommends against. And I suppose in some respects that would be a fair statement. The reason that it's off by default really relates to performance. So what are we really talking about here? Well, by default, the information that you write to your photos, so you add a keyword, you add a star rating, whatever the case may be, that information only exists inside the Lightroom catalog. Nowhere else, only in the catalog. I have two basic issues with this. Number one, every now and then, through no fault of my own, I feel the need to use some other piece of software to look at a photo. Maybe I'm in a rush and I already have Adobe Bridge running, and so I just browse the photo that way. I want to be able to use other applications to view, not to change, because everything that I'm going to do with my photos that changes something I'll do inside of Lightroom. Remember that rule? But to actually view that information by writing the information, the metadata, out to the XMP sidecar file. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. By writing that information out automatically, now other applications can see the metadata also. Second, that serves as essentially an automatic backup. Because I'm writing my metadata out to my photos, essentially, I now have two copies, you might say, of my metadata. It is still inside the Lightroom catalog, but it is also out in the actual photos themselves. For raw captures, because Lightroom does not want to mess with your raw captures, it creates that XMP sidecar file. It's an extensible markup language-based file that contains all the metadata, well, not all, but contains most of the metadata about your photos. I prefer to have that option turned on. Now, in the case of raw captures, that means a separate little file. And I'll hear people say, well, I don't want to have a separate file. But you're never going to see the file, so what are you worried about? Inside of Lightroom, you'll never see that XMP sidecar file. It is sitting out there on your hard drive right next to the original photo with the same base file name, but I don't let that bother me. And furthermore, I want that automatic backup, and I want that cross-platform compatibility, being able to browse my metadata across different applications. So I can see my keywords and my star ratings in Adobe Bridge, for example. It is important to note that not everything you do with your photos in Lightroom is preserved or backed up, you might say, in that XMP sidecar file. Not everything, which means you still really probably want to back up your catalog. More about some of that in a moment, but among the things that are not saved in that XMP sidecar file, it includes pick flags. We'll talk about pick flags shortly. It also includes the history of what you've done to your photos. So when you go into the develop module and you see a list of all the things you've done to this image, you won't see that list if you have to recover, if you lose your catalog and have to go based on just the XMP sidecar file. Virtual copies and smart previews, those are not included there. And there's a couple of other things. So it's important to keep in mind that this option doesn't back up everything, but it backs up the vast majority of the information. The adjustments that you apply and all of what I call the standard metadata. So star ratings and keywords, all the stuff that's part of either the EXIF or the IPTC metadata standards, for example. Then we have a couple of options here related to geocoding, which means GPS coordinates attached to your photos. And so if you take a picture with a camera that includes a GPS receiver, which is an increasing number of cameras, there's at least a handful of digital SLRs that have built-in GPS receivers now. Most smartphones, if you take a picture with a smartphone, there's a GPS receiver built in there, and many of the compact kind of point-and-shoot style cameras now include a GPS receiver so that the location where you took the picture is included in the metadata for the picture, and then you can go find the picture on the map. And so these options relate to that possibility? And specifically, do you want to show, for example, the name of the city and state where the picture was taken based on the GPS coordinates? So a couple options that are not terribly critical for our purposes right now, but worth knowing about, especially if you ever take pictures in a location. I guess that's all pictures. Thank you very much for, I wouldn't call that laughing, but whatever you call that. So chuckling mildly. So then we get to this EXIF section. And this is an interesting one, a potentially problematic one, depending on your philosophy when it comes to raw captures. Write date or time changes into proprietary raw files, raw formats. Now, I should really quickly underscore that this is a purely hypothetical setting for me, because I would never cross a time zone boundary and forget to change the time on my camera. So my camera is always, this is hypothetical, just I don't want you to get the wrong idea and think I'm forgetful or anything. But hypothetically speaking, if I were to go to the Palouse and take some pictures with my camera, that's in Eastern Washington State, Pacific time zone, and leave my camera set on Eastern time, I would want to be able to fix that. And more importantly, for me personally, I would never want to admit that I didn't change the clock on my camera, so I would want to destroy the evidence and actually change the time in metadata. So then the question is, are you comfortable with that? Do you want the time change to be a metadata update, information that is essentially only in the Lightroom catalog, or do you want to make it look like the picture was actually taken at that particular time, the corrected time? I'll show you how to fix it later, but you have to make a decision. Do you want that information to only be contained within the catalog, or do you want it to be reflected in the photos themselves? Why might you not want to correct, revisionist history as it was? Why would you not want to change the time in the file? Because you're probably capturing in RAW format to take advantage of all the advanced capabilities of your camera and RAW processing software, etc. So do you want to trust Lightroom, essentially, to make a change to that file and possibly mess something up? So I have this weird, I'm paranoid, but I'm way too trusting all at the same time. I figure that Adobe probably does a pretty good job of testing this. You are taking a little bit of a risk, but I figure they've tested it pretty well. If there were a problem, I probably would have heard about it from somebody, so maybe it's not such a big risk. Plus, let's not forget, I never forget to change the clock on my camera anyway, so this is totally just hypothetical. So I leave this option turned on. I know it goes against all of these other areas where I profess to be so paranoid, but this is one that I'd just rather have it be corrected sort of permanently, as it were. All right, so that takes care of those catalog settings. Pretty straightforward. Just a couple of options that I personally prefer to change in terms of automatically writing the changes out to the XMP. Now, I did mention there's a potential performance hit if you turn on that automatic option to write information out to the XMP sidecar files. Let's say you select 10,000 pictures and you add one keyword to 10,000 pictures. It's a small keyword, and it's a small XMP sidecar file, but there's 10,000 of them. Well, Lightroom can do that work in the background, but it's certainly going to slow things down a little bit while you're working. And so if performance is your first and foremost concern, you might want to leave that option turned off. You can always manually write the information out to your photos. So for example, I'll switch to the grid view so that I can select multiple images. I just press Control-A on Windows or Command-A on Macintosh in order to select all images. At the moment, I'm looking at all photographs in the entire catalog. It could also be a specific folder, but the point is that I can choose then from the menu, metadata, followed by save metadata to files. And that performs the exact same task, but the thing is, I don't want to have to remember to do this, and I don't want to have to think about it. I just want Lightroom to do it for me so that I know that in real time, all of my information is being essentially backed up. And again, it's not all of my information, but it's most of my information from the Lightroom catalog will be written out to the actual files themselves, or again, in the case of raw capture formats, into an XMP sidecar file. To me, that's worthwhile. And yes, if you turn that option on, as I just have, Lightroom will go back and actually process all of the old images to update the XMP sidecar files, for example, for all of them. So it will go back and apply that kind of retroactively, you might say. All right, so remember what I said about pick flags? Does anybody remember what I said about pick flags? They're not They don't go out to the XMP sidecar file. That was just a test, and only one person sort of passed. But it's all right. Pick flags. Pick flags are interesting. Pick flags are Lightroom specific. Pick flags are not supported by Adobe Bridge. So if you like pick flags, I don't think you should use them. So I don't like pick flags anyway. I mean, not that there's anything inherently wrong with pick flags. It's not their fault. It's really my fault. I'm not really good with the whole yes or no thing. I like a lot of like shades of gray, no pun intended, and maybes. See, because my last name's Gray. I like a lot of shades of gray. I like having star ratings because I can have a 1-star rating and a 2-star rating and a 3, etc. It's all the way up to, I think it goes up to 5. Pick flags, it's like yes or no. And not only is it just yes or no, what's the opposite of a pick flag? Reject. That is not good for my self-esteem. So I can give no stars, but reject, I mean, that's a little harsh, don't you think? I feel. So I don't like pick flags, just inherently. I don't like having to make a yes or no decision. I'd rather have, well, this one's okay, but it's not my favorite. This one I really like, and here's my 5-star image, hypothetically speaking. I haven't captured one yet, but I know that's going to happen. But with pick flags, the other problem is, as I mentioned before, pick flags are non-standard metadata. It is a Lightroom-specific feature. So if you assign pick flags to your images and you still write the metadata out to the photos, you're not going to be able to find that pick flag anywhere in Adobe Bridge, for example. And it also means that your XMP sidecar file is not going to contain any of that pick flag or reject flag information. What to do? Well, you can make sure to really frequently always back up your Lightroom catalog so that you never have to worry about losing your pick flags. Or you could just make sure to use only standard metadata. And so my personal approach is to always use star ratings. Now that works well for me because I prefer star ratings anyway, but it can also work for you even if you're a pick flag person. You can just change the way you think about star ratings. Let's assume that you want to use a pick flag to represent a keeper, your best photos, and you want a reject flag to represent the ones that you'll probably throw away at some point. You can just, and you're not using star ratings for anything, you could decide that a pick flag equals a 5-star rating and a reject flag equals a 1-star rating, for example. That way you're still getting the same basic concept applied to your photos. You don't have to use all of the star ratings, but it also means that you're using standard metadata. So what to do if you've already assigned pick flags to your images? That's so simple. It's so simple that you didn't even see me do it, because I just filtered my images based on the pick flag attribute. I went to all photographs. So now I've been assigning pick flags for years, theoretically, and now I decide that I'm going to stop using pick flags. Well, I want to also change all the old pick flags to be, for example, a 5-star rating, or maybe you're going to use 1 star for a pick flag and no stars for a reject flag, or whatever it is that you want to do in terms of your approach to those pick flags. But I've gone to all photographs. On the library filter bar, if you don't see the library filter bar, when you're in the library module, the / key is a toggle that allows you to hide or reveal that library filter bar. You can go to Attribute and choose Pick Flag. There's also this little quick filter option at the top right of the film strip where we can also choose Pick Flag, Star Rating, or Color Label as our filter criteria. But the point is that I'm filtering my images, every single picture in my entire catalog, and filtering based on Pick Flag status. I don't have to go folder by folder, and this is one of the things that I love about Lightroom as compared to, for example, Bridge. In Lightroom, because it's based on a catalog, I can work very quickly and easily across my entire catalog of photos. So in this case, I have, what is this, a grand total of 137 images in this catalog, not a big catalog. My real catalog at home has almost 300,000 photos in it, and I can filter across all of those photos very quickly and easily. So here I filter based on the pick flag status, for example. What do I want to do to those pick flagged images? Well, I'll select all of them. So again, making sure that I'm in the grid view, not the loop view. So when I'm in the loop view, even if I've selected multiple images, Lightroom considers me to be working only on a single image at a time. So if I want to apply a change to multiple images, it's important that I be in the grid view. There are other ways you could work around that issue, but to me it's just as easy to switch to the grid view when we're assigning attributes to all of those images. So let's just assume for sake of argument that we've decided that in lieu of a pick flag, I'm going to use a 5-star rating. I've selected all of those images, again, having filtered them based on the pick flag status, and I press the number 5 on the keyboard, and all of those images get a 5-star rating assigned to them. What about the pick flag? Shall we keep it around just for fun? No, let's go ahead and get rid of the pick flag. So I'll press the letter U on the keyboard for unpick to remove the pick flag from the images. All those images disappeared, of course, because I'm still filtering based on the pick flag. But now if I filter by 5 stars, I've got all the exact same images. Let's go see if we've got any rejected images. Rejected with 5 stars. So rejected photos. I've got one image that's rejected. Again, you would define some sort of method of keeping yourself organized when we're transitioning from pick flags to star ratings. I can select all of my rejected images, and let's assume that I'm going to use a 1-star rating to represent a rejected photo, and then I could remove that reject flag. So just a way of kind of going back and cleaning up. And it's one of the things that I try to reinforce to photographers who feel that they've made a mess of things in Lightroom, is that generally speaking, it's not that difficult if you're careful and pay attention to the details. It's not that difficult to go back and filter the images based on something you did wrong and then make a change based on those, whatever those things may be. So for example, here with pick flags, switching to star ratings just by filtering and assigning new criteria. So incredibly simple. All right, so let's take a look at kind of a variation on a theme, color labels. Oh, I love color labels. So color labels are interesting. They represent a color, of course. They don't really necessarily have an inherent meaning. Technically, I suppose you could say that color labels represent sort of a priority flag, where red is really, really important, urgent, as the case might be. But a lot of photographers just define color labels to mean whatever they'd like. The thing about color labels is that they don't actually represent a color. That's all like smoke and mirrors. Did you know this? See, I'm also a conspiracy theorist, apparently. No, but the color label, it actually is just a metadata field, and it's not a color, it's a word. I know, we're getting into the weeds here, aren't we? I mean, it's so complicated because, let's pretend, are there any software engineers here? I usually try to make sure to ask that question earlier in the presentation. Any software engineers? No? Good. I mean, not good, but like it's safer. Hypothetically speaking, we would have asked them questions and given them a hard time. So hypothetically speaking, if you were writing software, you're creating software to manage photos, and one of the facilities for identifying photos was a color label, and the metadata field, you had to put a word in metadata, and one of the colors is red, what word would you put in metadata for that red color label? Note to self, do not ask for feedback from the audience. Red, right? And how about yellow? Yellow. And green. Green. Boy, we could do this all day. We'll just name colors and repeat them. So it makes perfect sense. The only reason that I emphasize this point is that this is how Lightroom deals with color labels. So Lightroom thinks about the color labels as a color. So when you add a red color label, it puts the word red in metadata. It seems to me, it's so obvious that I have to belabor the point to emphasize just how obvious that is, or should have been. Adobe Bridge, on the other hand, here are the words that Adobe Bridge uses to assign color labels in your metadata. So red equals select, yellow is second, green is approved, blue is review, and purple is to do. To do what? I don't know, but to do something. So this is interesting. Now, color labels are by their nature a little bit arbitrary, at least for most of us. So you might assign some arbitrary things. So for example, I would use a green color label to mark photos that they weren't necessarily my favorite images from a trip, but I wanted to share them with someone. I saw something interesting, a coffee shop that looked interesting, whatever it might be, take a picture, mark with a green color label so when I get home, I'll remember. Or I'm leading a workshop and I take some pictures of the attendees. I don't usually take pictures of the attendees because, well, that's a different story, but I might assign a green color label so that I can then send them after the fact, oh, it was so great having you on the workshop. Here's a picture of yourself that I thought you might like to have. The point is that we come up with some sort of criteria for using those color labels. It's not necessarily going to be tied into the words that Adobe Bridge decided relate to your photos or to those color labels. So now what happens if back in the day you were using Adobe Bridge and you were using color labels and you start using Lightroom and import all those photos into Lightroom? Now what are you going to do? Because in the meantime, you've assigned color labels in Lightroom. So now you have some images that have select as the color label and some images that have red as the color label. Boy, what a mess we've created for ourselves. Well, I leave all these set to the Lightroom defaults just because that makes logical sense. And then we can actually filter. So once again, when we've created trouble for ourselves in Lightroom, it's actually pretty easy, generally speaking, to dig ourselves out of that mess because we have such robust capabilities as far as filtering our photos. So we assign something in the wrong way or what have you, we can filter our images. So once again, I'm browsing all photographs, a real handy option over here on the left panel in the library module. In that catalog section, I can browse every single picture in my catalog and then filter based on a variety of criteria. So here, for example, you can see that I have label set as the rightmost column. So I've chosen label from the pop-up here under the metadata heading. And I can see, oh look, some of the images, well, one image had a legitimate color label assigned, yellow equals yellow. So when I filter based on yellow, I see the image with the yellow color label. And I have a bunch of images with no color label at all, but you'll see that I have a few images that have the word select. Select obviously relates to which color? Paying attention. Red, as we saw in the Adobe Bridge defaults for those color labels. And therefore, wouldn't you expect to see red as a little square icon at the bottom right corner? No, because that's not what Lightroom thinks of as red. In Lightroom's parlance, red is red. From Adobe Bridge, red was select. And so we have the wrong word, so to speak, as far as Lightroom is concerned. And so those just get referenced as, you might have noticed down here, we have this option to filter based on an uncategorized or unlabeled option. But we also have over to the left here, the white one is custom, meaning it's some other word that I don't recognize for the color label. Fortunately, this too is easy to fix. So select, I've filtered based on the select color label. I already know I can go check if I need to the settings in the color label options. I can select all of those images, and now I'll just assign the red color label that I intended for this image in the first place. So filter based on the quote-unquote wrong criteria, and then select all the images and assign the correct criteria. The keyboard shortcut, as you saw in the dialog for those color label definitions, the number 6 on the keyboard is the keyboard shortcut for red. And so now if I switch that label to show me the red color labels, I have actual red color labels assigned to the photos. So again, a little bit of a mismatch between Adobe Bridge and Adobe Lightroom in terms of the definitions of those color labels. And that can naturally lead to a bit of confusion. But fortunately, once again, fairly easy to fix once you've recognized that you had that mismatch problem in the first place. All right, so let's take a look at capture time. Now, I should stress vigorously from the start that what you're about to see is completely fake. I did not actually forget to change the time on my camera. Everybody on board with that? Everybody going to pretend to buy in on that? Sure, thanks. I appreciate it. All right, so I have, let's take a look here. We've got a photo captured. This seems to be somewhere around either sunrise or sunset. I happen to know it's sunset. And if we take a look at the date time original, we see that it is 11:23 p.m. But what I didn't mention is this is in the summertime. The days were very long. And no, okay. So that's New York time in metadata. And I need to correct it to Palouse time in this case. I essentially need to shift the time zone by 3 zones. So I'm going to select all these photos. Of course, I will start off by going into the grid view and select all of those images. And now I just want to edit my capture time for those images. Remember that I personally, you don't have to, but I personally chose the option in catalog settings that this will actually write the change out to the original raw capture. And in theory, it is possible that Lightroom could make a mistake and totally corrupt my raw captures. And therefore, it's not a bad idea to be confident that you have a backup to revert to just in case before you do this. Again, it's not something that I worry too much about. I've done this, I've demonstrated for test purposes only numerous times. Never had to do it for real, obviously, as we already established. I've never had any issues. I've never heard of anyone having any issues with this, but that's not to say it's not possible that there would be some sort of issue. So from the metadata menu, I will choose Edit Capture Time, once again having selected all of the images. And then we have a few options. A couple of, well, only one of these really I think makes sense to me in terms of a normal workflow, things that might actually occur. We can adjust to a specific date and time. That might make sense for one individual photo, especially if you're trying to create an alibi for yourself. But when it comes to a series of photos, you don't want them all to appear as having been captured at the exact same date and time. So usually what we're doing is shifting by a set number of hours based on the time zone. And so I will choose that option. So shift by set number of hours and a time zone adjust. And right now, the original time for the currently selected photo, I have multiple images selected, but there's one that has the key selection. It shows 11:26 p.m. I happen to know that this photo was taken in the Palouse. My camera was set to New York time, and therefore I need to subtract 3 hours from the time. But I can also validate, does 11:30 seem right for sunset? Not in the Palouse anyway. Does 8:30 seem like a reasonable time, considering this was photographed in the summertime? Yes, that makes perfect sense. So how many hours will I shift by? 3. In which direction? I need -3. I want to subtract 3 hours from the time. So -3, and it even conveniently shows me what that translates into in case I can't do the math of subtracting 3 hours from 11:23 p.m. -3 hours, carry the 1, I don't know, but it shows me right here. So very, very easy. So then I will then choose Change All, and it's done. It's already finished. See how quick that was? My mistake has now disappeared. No one will ever know that, I mean, hypothetically speaking, if I hadn't just faked a mistake, then somebody would have seen that. Would not? They won't know it now. I mean, now you know, and now this is going to be recorded and posted to YouTube. So now I'm having second thoughts about having demonstrated that. Now everybody's going to know, but it's my own fault. All right, so what else are we going to talk about? Missing photos. Yeah, Anybody? No, not me. Never. No, sirree, never had a photo go missing. What is the #1 cause, based on statistics that I'm inventing out of thin air, the #1 cause of missing photos in Lightroom? Lots of answers. I think when they blend together, the sounds overlap and it forms photographer. It's usually self-inflicted, right? Yeah. Okay, almost always. It's not 100%, but it's like 99 and 4. Was it 99 and 44? Anybody get that reference? No? Okay, that's all right. Yes. Is it 99? 44? Okay. Just making sure that my obscure references are accurate. So thank you. All right. So when we have missing photos, it's almost always because you did something wrong. And I can only say that because I'm not like face-to-face talking with one person telling them they did something wrong. I'm just speaking generally. Not necessarily you or you, but the other guy did something wrong. What are those things? There's a variety of things. So it could be that you keep your photos on an external hard drive and it's just not connected right now. Oh, well, that's no big deal. But it's probably because you did something wrong, meaning that you renamed a folder, or you renamed a photo, or you moved a photo somewhere else using some other software. Again, once we're using Lightroom to manage our images, we want to use Lightroom exclusively to manage our images. So let's take a look at some of those little scenarios. In this case, I have this fake hard drive that I'm using. It's actually a folder out here on my desktop called Photo Storage. To simulate disconnecting my external hard drive, I'm just going to rename that folder, theoretically that hard drive, just X I heard. So we'll put the letter X, Photo Storage, on the front of it. And now when we come back into, wait, where'd all my pictures go? Well, I can still see the pictures because the previews had already been built. Lightroom still has previews available to it. But if you look closely, you can see there is a question mark attached to each of my folders. that indicates that the folder is missing, and there is an exclamation point associated with each of the thumbnails for each of my photos. And if I, for example, go into the develop module, because I have not created smart previews for my images, I can't work in the develop module offline. If I had generated smart previews, I would be able to, but since I did not, now it tells me the file could not be found. Nothing will strike more fear in the heart of a photographer than missing photos. But usually it's relatively benign, all things considered. So for example, going back to this fake hard drive that's really just a folder, if I reconnect my hard drive, so in this case I just renamed it so it wouldn't be found, that takes care of it. Now when I come back into Lightroom, and as soon as it kind of catches up with itself, oh, all the photos, all the folders, everything's back. Whew, big sigh of relief. All right, well, what else might we do to cause a problem for ourselves? Well, let's say this Spain trip was really, we don't even have to just say it, it's actually a true statement. It's also Portugal. And so I'm browsing on my hard drive and I just say, oh, Spain, that was also Portugal. I should change the name of that folder. That would be helpful to me, but not to Lightroom. So now we get back into Lightroom and now the entire Spain folder is missing. Or I might go out onto the hard drive and I find an image. I'll, say I'm just browsing these photos and I find an image, or maybe I'm using Adobe Bridge for no good reason, as we've already established. And so I've got back to the Spain-Portugal folder and I'm browsing through all of my images and I say, I don't know what I say, horse, look, oh, it's a cute horse. Oh, I mean, it's kind of, is that a happy sign or a mad sign? Anybody know? I'm going to go with happy because he didn't bite me or anything. But I'm going to rename the image horse. There we go. So now we got to go try and fix some of these problems. But all of these problems, or most of these problems, probably occurred because I did not follow the rule of working within Lightroom. Once you're using Lightroom to manage your images, it's really important that Lightroom become your sort of control center, as it were. Remember, it's got that catalog. It's trying to keep track of your photos, and if you go out somewhere else and start messing with your photos outside of Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't know what you're doing over there. So everything has to be done inside of Lightroom. So let's take a look at how we're actually going to fix some of those things. And it depends. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and just hide something else. We'll just so we'll create a couple of different problems for ourselves, just for fun. I'm just going to put WA for Palouse because it's Washington. And so we can go out and find all these various problems to fix. Well, when it's a folder, it's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. We can right-click on the folder, for example, and find missing folder. So when I've got that little question mark indicating that the folder doesn't exist, what it really means is Lightroom can't find the folder in the location where it thinks it should be and with the name for the folder that it thinks is assigned to it. So if I moved a folder to a different location, or if I rename the folder, or any of those sorts of things, Lightroom doesn't know about it. I need to tell Lightroom about it. No problem at all. I'll right-click on the folder, for example, choose Find Missing Folder. Now I have to be really, really careful to make sure I'm picking the right folder. So which folder did I right-click on initially? Well, that was under my photo storage, and that was the Spain folder that I renamed into Spain-Portugal. So I'll go select that folder and click Choose, and the Spain folder is now totally happy. And it also reflects the change. It's now called within Lightroom Spain-Portugal. And same thing for the Palouse folder, for example. Find the missing folder, navigate out to that same place. I just made a mistake. Sorry, Lightroom, won't happen again. And now we're back. So just recovering, oh wait, I still have a missing picture. What happened? It was in the same folder, and I reconnected the folder, except I also renamed it. And so now we need to fix that little problem as well. So I can just click the exclamation. I'll go back to the grid view here just so you can see that we've got an exclamation point there at the top right of the thumbnail. It also shows up on the film strip. And so we can just click on that option. So in this case, I both lost the folder as far as Lightroom was concerned by renaming it without telling Lightroom, but I also renamed an individual image, and so I need to reconnect that. So if I just click on that the exclamation point icon at the top right of the thumbnail, I'll get a dialog that tells me a couple of pieces of information that could potentially be very helpful. The original file name, which in this case isn't going to help me very much, and the original folder. So I know where it should be and what it should be called, and hopefully that's going to make my life a little bit easier. Also, I can see the actual thumbnail for the image, so I know what photo I'm looking for, so hopefully this won't be too difficult. In this case, I know it won't be too difficult because I just made this problem like 2 minutes ago, and I know that I called that photo horse. And so if I go out and find that image, there's the horse image, and select, yes, we're good. It's kind of reminding me that I shouldn't have renamed the photo, basically, rubbing it in a little, you might say. And so now that's reconnected. And so I've been able to recover or reconnect all of those images and folders based on telling Lightroom where the images actually should be. Now I should point out also, if it's a situation where you've done a whole bunch of work, it is recursive, which means once you point it, for example, if you switch hard drives and you point it to one folder, it's intelligent enough under most typical circumstances that it will also realize that all those other folders are also in that same place. So if you have 50 folders that you had just moved to a different hard drive, for example, you're not going to have to reconnect each one individually. If you renamed 50 folders outside of Lightroom, then you are going to have to reconnect 50 folders individually. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. So let's assume that you decide you really do want to rename your photos. Now you understand you cannot do that outside of the context of Lightroom, but you actually do want to rename your images. Well, generally speaking in Lightroom, the approach that you would take is to rename all of the photos in a given folder, for example. So why might we actually choose to rename our photos? Well, I would say that more often than not, the real reason is just that we're kind of annoyed by the notion of the file name coming out of the camera being completely useless to us. But also, I don't know about your camera, and I know some of you will have a better answer to this than I do. Your camera may or may not use only 4 digits for the number. Why do I need 4 letters before the 4 numbers that are meaningless? Why can't I just have 8 numbers? Because with only 4 numbers, how many images can we capture before we go back to number 1?
9,999.
Yes, 9,999, and then we're back to image number 1. So it's kind of a good idea. It's not critical, but it's kind of a good idea to use a more meaningful naming structure, in part so that you won't have a whole bunch of duplicate images in your catalog. So that if you search based on file name, that actually returns a single image, as opposed to, here's every image number 1. How many times have you rolled over past 10,000 so that you start back with number 1? It could be a fair number of photos, depending on how many images are in your catalog, of course. But also, if you ever send your photos anywhere else for any purpose, what would you rather send to a client, for example? A file that's called img_0923, or one that's called Tim Gray is an amazing photographer. You should totally hire him to take pictures for you, -0001. I mean, I'm just kind of hypothetically. I mean, you can use, it's okay. It's not trademarked. If you want to use that name for your own photos, totally okay. But maybe, just something that's a little more meaningful. In this case, I'm going to rename some images from the Palouse. So maybe it's just Palouse and the year and a number, just a sequence number. Or maybe it's your business name, or maybe it's the client name, or whatever might make sense. It's just a little bit nicer for them to reference, and so it's not, oh, which image did you want me to make a nice big print of? Image underscore yada yada. So I'm going to go to the library menu. Again, I've selected the images that I want to rename. This could have involved filtering, it could have involved all sorts of stuff, but usually it involves going to a specific folder and selecting every picture in the folder. That's my typical approach. You might also rename during the import process, just so that you're getting it done that much earlier in your workflow. But we can do this after the fact as well. So library, rename photos, and that brings up the rename photos dialog. Notice, helpful little tidbit here, we get an indication of how many images are being renamed, a good little verification that we're doing the right thing. And then what do we want to use as our naming option here? the sky's the limit, you might say. We can actually define our own structure. So you'll see that there's a variety of presets here. You can use, I've got a 5-digit sequence in addition to a custom name. I can use date plus the file name, the original file name, the import number, the image number, the sequence number. I've got all sorts of options available. I'll go ahead and choose this 5-digit sequence number option, for example. But I'm also going to click the edit option from that pop-up just so that I can show you this dialog where we're able to define the structure. So what do you want to use as your file naming convention? We've got all sorts of metadata here. So for example, I know a lot of photographers like to use the intellectual genre as part of the file name, or the focal length. Focal length is mostly for bird photographers because they like to rub it in that they were using like a 600 millimeter lens, right? But you've got all sorts of options based on the metadata, so it can be customized. You can use the date. So it's the year of capture, the month of capture, the day of capture, followed by maybe some custom text, followed by a sequence number, whatever the case may be. I'm going to keep it simple, though, and we'll just use a custom name and a 5-digit sequence number. So what will the custom text be? Palouse. Notice I've got a dash in there, so it's going to be Palouse-0001, or how many? 4 zeros. I think I only said 3 of them. Starting with number 1. Well, what if I want to start with a different number? That's fine too. I can just change the number here. So if I were maybe working in batches of photos for some reason, or I had images in a couple different folders and I wanted them to all be in sequence, whatever the case may be, I can certainly change that. Typically, of course, I would start with sequence number 1. So I can define that sort of custom structure even based on the metadata in the images themselves. I can add my name and some flowery prose about what a great photographer I am, or whatever the case may be, and then go ahead and click OK. And all of those images will be renamed. You can see now that they are sequenced. And note, by the way, that if we're using a sequence number, that sequence number will reflect the order in which the images appear. So I happen, in this case, to be sorted based on capture time, so that my images are in what I would consider the most logical sequence order as far as that numbering. But you could sort them in a variety of different ways, filter, etc. But generally, it's going to be all of the images in a given folder, sorted by capture time, and then use some sort of meaningful name. I do recommend, if you're going to rename your images, I do recommend that before you get started with that, figure out a structure that makes sense for you, an approach to renaming. Because that's one of the things, it's not as important an issue as some of these other organizational challenges, but it can be frustrating when you use a specific file naming structure one year, and the next year you totally change it to something completely different, and the next year you go on to something else. Sometimes you're renaming the photos based on the date of capture, sometimes you're based on location, sometimes you're based on lens focal length, or whatever metadata you might use. It's worth, I think, thinking about the options that are available, looking at the list of metadata values you can choose from, for example, and thinking about what's meaningful to you. Because the file name, in some ways, becomes something of a keyword. You can filter or search based on the actual file name for the images, and also if you send the file to someone else, they're going to see that keyword. So thinking about all the various possibilities, I think it's worth doing that before you set out on a weekend project to rename every photo in your catalog, for example. All right, so folders, folders, folders. We can make such a mess of folders. And so we're going to talk about a few different options. It all boils down to kind of one basic concept, in that we can make a mess of our folder structure, and then it can be really, really difficult to find our photos later. So first, a philosophical moment. My approach to naming folders. It's very strict and very loose all at the same time because it's conceptual. When it comes to naming my folders, what I'm most interested in is being able to find my photos. When I look at my list of folders, they're going to be listed alphabetically. So if I'm looking for a particular set of images, I'm going to scroll through an alphabetical list. And so for me personally, what makes the most sense is to have the first few characters of that folder name be something meaningful to me. Which is to say, if you said, "Hey Tim, do you have any pictures of red barns?" I would say, yes, Palouse. If you asked for Wales, I would say Alaska. If you asked for a blue church, I would say Slovakia. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. Bratislava. My point being is that when you're asking for a particular photo or a particular type of photo, whatever the case might be, I usually, not always, but I usually can think of very often where I took the picture or what the subject was or what the circumstances were. What I usually don't think of, for me personally, you might be different, but what I don't think of is the date that I took the picture. I barely know what day it is today. I have to look at my phone to know what the date is today. And so when you ask me, when did you make that trip to Slovakia, I will say with absolute honesty and pure confidence, I have no idea. Okay, I know it was in like the last 5 years, but that's about it. So for me, dates don't work. How many actually use dates and it works perfectly because you can, wait, no, that's way too many people. And if I say, show me a picture of a rainbow, you can go to a specific folder based on the date. No, we're not talking about tags yet. That's cheating. No keywords yet.
Don't care.
Don't care. So who can find an image based on the folder based on date? Exclusively. Now it's more one guy. Are you an engineer by any chance? No, they usually are. That's not a bad thing. It's just a coincidence I've noticed in my very unscientific study over the years. A bird photographer. That defies every... So more often than not, when I ask this question, it's usually like one person in the room, and more than half the time they're an engineer. But in terms of actually being able to find photos based on the date of the folder, yes, we have all sorts of other things. So maybe he's using keywords in addition to find a particular species of bird, or he knows which lens he used to photograph that bird, or where he was, whatever the case may be. But the point is, not that you have to name the folders that you use the way I name my folders, but that it's worth thinking about what actually comes to mind. When I'm looking for a particular photo, what comes to mind? When I'm looking for a bird photo, it's usually going to be in a folder called Florida or San Diego, because that's where I've photographed birds, or Bosque del Apache. But it's not going to be, I don't remember what year that was. But again, it might be, this is when I wish I was a wedding photographer. I mean, not really. But in terms of organizing my photos, that's the easiest, because it's always just based on the name of the couple that you photographed, right? Or if you're a product photographer, it's the name of the company or the name of the product that you're photographing. But when when your photography is mostly travel, then it's sort of a little bit easier if you can remember where you were. But the point being is that I think it's worthwhile to have a folder structure that makes sense for you based on the way you think about your photos. So let's correct a couple of little issues here related to those folders. We have a variety of different options when it comes to the renaming, but you need to think about what makes sense to you. We can absolutely rename our folders. So let's say, for example, don't worry about why there's no pictures there. We'll find that out in a little bit. But let's assume that I don't think Bratislava when I think about the images that are contained theoretically within this folder. Instead, I think about Slovakia. So then I should really probably put Slovakia first, because these folders are listed alphabetically, and I'm going to go down to the S's and not find Slovakia. Now I've got to do a search maybe, and I find it under Bratislava. So I can just select a folder, right-click, and choose Rename. And I'll just cut Bratislava, and I'll just call it Slovakia. I can put a dash if I want to separate it, but this will work perfectly fine for me. And I actually, remember when I was talking about the date thing? And I made it seem like dates were somehow a bad thing in the context of a folder name? Well, no, I just meant at the beginning, because I can't ever remember the date. But I do like to have the year and generally the month included as part of that folder name, because very often, or somewhat often, I go to the same place multiple times. And so when I have multiple folders from the same basic location, I like to also be able to pick and choose which trip I'm looking for. So in this case, I've got 2013-03, which indicates March of 2013. Notice that I put the year first so that it will actually sort properly, because otherwise, we might necessarily have, you might have different years listed in different orders depending on what month, if the month came first, etc. So I always list the year first, then the month when I'm using a date-based folder structure in any form. So I'll go ahead and just save that change. And look, no missing folder. And no missing photos, except we haven't seen the photos. We'll get to those photos in a moment. But because I made the change inside of Lightroom, no problem at all. So let's make a few more changes. Not necessarily in terms of the structure of the folders per se, but I have these New York City photos. And for some absurd reason, actually the only reason was I couldn't think of any other example of when I might have created multiple folders for one trip. Well, actually, that's not true. I could have done this by day 1, day 2, day 3, but I thought it was more colorful to call it after sunset and before sunset. But again, this illustrates that issue of after alphabetically comes before, and so the folders are in the wrong order conceptually. But that's neither here nor there because I don't like using subfolders anyway. I can always filter based on other criteria, including the capture date, for example. So I certainly don't need folders for day 1, day 2, day 3, because I can always filter based on the date. Go to a specific folder, go up to the library filter bar, and see the dates that I captured within that folder and pick and choose among those dates. So I don't need to have individual folders for the dates, plus then I find it a little bit frustrating when I'm trying to remember which date it was, etc. So I don't generally find a need to have these subfolders. It's not to say that I never use them, but I don't generally. I use a pretty flat folder structure. So I have this New York. Well, let's go ahead and first off and rename this folder. So we'll call this, for example, New York Skyline. It should be noted that I'm calling the folder New York Skyline when in fact these pictures were taken from New Jersey. Full credit. But they are of New York, so I think of them as New York, and I don't think of them as New Jersey photos, obviously. So I've got the after sunset folder and the before sunset folder. I'll just go to each of those folders individually. And it's surprising to me sometimes that photographers don't realize that this is possible. We can move our photos from one folder to another inside of Lightroom. It seems that a lot of photographers, for whatever reason, get under the impression that it's sort of locked in place, that you can't do all this file management stuff inside of Lightroom, which is what leads to those biggest problems in the first place. You think it can't be done here, so you have to go outside of Lightroom. Not true. So I'm going to select all of the images. In this case, I'm in the After Sunset folder. I use Control-A on Windows, Command-A on Macintosh to select all, and then I can just point to any one of the selected images and click and drag. And then I will drag them onto, did that go? And I will drag them onto New York Skyline, so that parent folder. It warns me that I am moving the photos on the disk. In fairness, this is something I usually don't like to do, moving images. I'd rather copy and then delete the originals just so I make sure they made it just fine. But this is one of those moments where I don't really worry about it too much, so I'll just go ahead and click the Move button, and those images get moved, presumably. Hopefully I don't think I had that last one selected, so we'll go fix that. But the point being is that we can select all of those images, go back and reselect these, and drag and drop into the desired location. Now note, in case it wasn't already obvious, if you hadn't noticed previously, that each folder on this list of folders in Lightroom on the left panel in the library module actually shows me how many images are contained within that folder. And so now I have in the New York Skyline folder 9 images. They were divided between the After Sunset and Before Sunset folders. And now those other 2 folders are empty. What shall I do with this clutter? Get rid of it. Get rid of it. So I will right click on, in this case, the After Sunset folder, and I will choose the option to remove. And then I'll go do the same thing for Before Sunset and remove. And now I've cleaned up that folder structure, kind of tidied things up just a little bit. Okay, are we ready for a big mess? Quick question there?
Yes, do we need to go back and make that change in the hard drive?
Excellent question. Do we need to make that change? So I just moved some images in Lightroom. Do I need to now go make the same change on the hard drive? No, Lightroom can do all of that for you. One-stop shopping at its best. So yeah, everything that you're doing in Lightroom is affecting what's happening on your hard drive in the context of renaming photos, renaming folders, making new folders, moving photos, etc. It's all being reflected on your hard drive itself. This folders panel, or the folder section here on the left side, the left panel in Lightroom's library module, is a direct reflection of the storage on your hard drive, or wherever it is that your photos are stored. All right. So remember Bratislava? And I would click on the folder and it would say there's no folders there. Now, any of you that have done a date-based folder structure and have ever gotten frustrated, we're going to deal with that now. This one is messy, potentially. Because let's not forget, a lot of photographers do like to divide up their images based on date, not necessarily as the primary folder structure, but as a subfolder structure within a location-based folder structure, perhaps. So let's go see what's happening in Slovakia. You'll see I have a little triangle here, a little spinner control. Inside of Slovakia, I have a folder called 2013. That's reasonable. My trip to Slovakia was in 2013. Oh, and then we have a folder based on the day, March 8th, 2000. That seems, perfectly reasonable. There are 11 photos there. So here are some images. Oh, there's the blue church that I mentioned. So we've got some photos. Oh, but it seems that I still have, it was 2013 again, apparently, on March 8th, 2013. So I see, March 9th is inside a folder called 2013, which is inside a folder called March 8th, which is inside a folder called 2013. Is this seeming a little bit familiar to anyone?
Why does Lightroom do that?
Why do... Oh, and the 10th goes even deeper down. So March 10th is in a 2013 folder, which is in a March 9th folder, which is in a 2013 folder, which is in a March 8th folder, which is a... Well, I got to catch my breath. And the question that I heard over here was, why does Lightroom do that?
It wasn't me.
He said in the nicest way possible. Lightroom does that because when you import the images, you can choose the option to organize by date. Now, for those who prefer to have their folder structure based on a date, this is very convenient. The problem is that sometimes a photographer forgets to make sure they're pointing to the same parent folder. So for example, maybe you have a Bratislava, Slovakia folder, and you want to have 2013, March 8th, March 9th, March 10th. Then each time you need to import into the Bratislava folder, not into the 2013 folder, and certainly not into the March 8th folder. We've got to go back to that same sort of top-level folder, as it were, for that given trip or whatever the case may be, the event, etc. The problem that we run into is when the next time I import, it's trying to import into the March 8th folder, and I forget to change it, and I still told it to organize by date. So it is trying to be helpful and making date-based folders underneath that. And so you get these nested upon nested upon nested folders, which can be a tremendous mess. Look at all this mess for, what is that, a grand total of, looks like about 20 pictures. Oh no, about 25 pictures, I think it is. Oh my goodness. So let's get this mess cleaned up. Well, fortunately, all things considered, it's a fairly straightforward problem to solve. But again, you want to be very careful when you're performing this sort of cleanup work. Make sure to validate. Am I deleting a folder that's truly empty? Do I have any filters set, etc. So I'm going to go down to this lowest level folder. I've expanded all of the folders that are available here. I will select all of the images in that lowermost folder, the March 10th folder, and I will drag and drop them up into the, in this case, Bratislava, Slovakia. Now, actually, I'm going to stop there for just a moment. What if I do want to retain my folder structure based on date? Well, then I'm not moving photos, I'm moving folders, and so I'll take this March 10th folder and drag and drop it into that top level 2013 folder. And then, let's see, here is my March 9th folder, and I'll drag that up into my 2013 folder. Note, again, having to confirm each time. And now, at this point, this 2013 folder, which had been under the March 8th folder, is empty, so I can right-click and remove. And then I'll just go ahead and check the rest of my structure, and there, sure enough, is another 2013 folder, right-click, remove. So now, I've cleaned up that mess on the assumption that I wanted date-based folders. And it's the same basic process if I decide that I don't want date-based folders, since it's perfectly feasible to go filter my images based on date anyway. I don't necessarily need them to be divided up into folders. It just depends on your personal preference. But in this case, I might take all of these photos from March 8th and just put them in my top-level Slovakia folder. I'm going to turn off the alert for the move, so we don't have to click that every time. And I'll select all of those images from March 9th and also drag them into the Slovakia folder. And finally, March 10th into the Slovakia folder. So now all of these subfolders are empty. I'll just right-click on the 2013 folder there and choose Remove. And all of that cluttered mess is cleaned up. So you absolutely can still use that date-based structure if you prefer. Just make sure that you're importing carefully so that the folders that you're moving into, that you're importing your images into, are not creating these nested date-based folders. Well, what about moving in the opposite direction? And this is another, you would think it was a hidden feature of Lightroom that nobody knew about, but it's actually not hidden. Well, it's not especially hidden anyway. What about we've got images that are in one folder and we want them into 2 or more folders? So in this case, I already talked about the Spain-Portugal folder. It used to be called just a Spain folder, but I renamed it to reflect the fact that the photos were captured in both Spain and Portugal. Actually, also France and Andorra, but I decided for my purposes here today, it would be easier to pretend that I only had to split them up into 2 folders instead of 4. So I'm like taking shortcuts and being lazy, but I'm admitting it, which I think like makes up for kind of the lazy part a little bit. So first off, I need to create a folder. Where do I need to create a folder? Well, in the same basic location, on the same hard drive, in the same folder, same basic folder structure. Well, if I go up to the plus icon to the right of the folder's header, a plus icon that seems invisible to many users, they don't realize it's there until someone points it out to them, we have the option to add a subfolder or to add a folder. Add a subfolder means put another folder inside the currently selected folder. Do I want that? No. Because in this case, I don't want a folder inside the Spain folder that contains the Portugal images. I want that in a completely separate folder. At least that's what I've decided. So that I basically am treating one trip as though it were 2 trips. I think of them as 2 separate things, Spain and then Portugal. So in that case, I would want to use add folder because I don't want the folder to be inside the Spain folder, the current folder. I could, however, go up to the parent folder, the top level folder, and choose the subfolder option. But quite frankly, I almost always use the add folder option instead of the add subfolder option, just because then I'm using the same basic procedure every time. I don't have to think about, am I making a subfolder or am I just putting a folder somewhere? So I'll choose that add folder option. And now I get to navigate to the location where I want to create that folder. So I've navigated to my photo storage location, whatever that might be. At the moment, you can see the Spain-Portugal folder. Down at the bottom left, I'll click the New Folder button, and we'll call this Portugal, and that was also 2013, for example. Whatever it is that I'd like to name that folder, and then we'll choose that. And you can see that I now have the Portugal folder created. Now, if I try to import into Lightroom an empty folder, nothing happens. But inside of Lightroom, I can create an empty folder that is included. So if I have a folder with no images and it has not been imported into Lightroom, the photos, the non-existent photos have not been imported into Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't see that folder. But I can add a folder directly within Lightroom. So having added the new folder, you can see it's sorted alphabetically, just as we would expect. I can go into the Spain-Portugal folder. Now, the only other problem with my little lazy example here is that it's only like 5 pictures that are included in this set of photos that were actually captured in Portugal. I promise I captured lots more other pictures in Portugal, but in the interest of honesty, these are the only pictures currently in this folder that were captured in Portugal. That was Andorra, and that's Andorra, and here's some France, etc. But we're just going to pretend like I only visited 2 countries on that trip. And once again, a simple drag and drop. This is becoming old school easy now. The Portugal folder now contains the Portugal images, and the Spain-Portugal folder contains only, in theory, the Spain images. There's also some other mixed up stuff in there. I obviously, at this point, probably want to rename the folder, get rid of the word Portugal there. So I'll right-click on the folder and choose Rename, and get rid of the word Portugal, for example, or whatever the case may be. So now I have those images divided up theoretically. Obviously, in this case, I might want to split things up. But again, it comes back to this notion of how do you think of the photos? When I think about the pictures of painting lines in Portugal, do I think about Spain because it was part of a trip to Spain? or do I think of that as a separate little piece? In this case, for whatever reason, it seemed like a completely different experience being in Portugal versus being in Spain, even though they're next door neighbors. And so it makes sense, in my mind at least, to have the Portugal photos separate. Whereas the France pictures that I mentioned here, that does not make sense to be separate for me, because this was driving through the Pyrenees, and when you're driving through the Pyrenees, you're basically zigzagging back and forth between Spain and France, and so I never really thought about it as kind of crossing an international boundary so much as just driving through the mountains. So again, it doesn't have to make logical sense, I assure you, because you can look at my folder structure and there might be some weird, crazy things there, but it has to make sense to you. And so again, thinking about that folder structure in terms of what makes the most sense for you personally. I, thank goodness, do not have to find your pictures, but you do, and so you should think about that. And again, it doesn't mean that my approach is the right approach for you, but hopefully it at least provides some food for thought so you can think about, okay, what does make sense? If a date-based folder structure makes perfect sense to you, then by all means, I'm all in favor of that. But if it doesn't, then maybe it's time to rethink it and make some changes and go back and clean things up. All right, so thus far, we've been solving problems inside a single Lightroom catalog. However, some photographers have created a little bit of a challenge for themselves by creating multiple catalogs. So let's address the issue of whether or not we might want to create multiple catalogs in the first place. In my opinion, it makes the most sense for most photographers to use one catalog for all of their photos. I have said a lot of stupid things over the years, and I have heard a lot of arguments to the contrary on a variety of subjects over the years. And when it comes to catalogs in Lightroom, I hear a lot of people telling me why it makes perfect sense to them to use multiple catalogs. In almost every single scenario, I have thought that their argument was a bad argument and that my idea was still the best idea, he said with humility. But the point is that I usually, I create catalogs based on the year. So with each new year, I create a new catalog, and that way I have a catalog based on the year. That would require me to remember what year I took a picture in order to go open that year's catalog and find that picture. My success rate with that is going to be extremely low. So that doesn't make sense. Plus, what month is it today? It's February. What are the odds that you're only accessing 2015 pictures right now versus looking back into December and November for some of the 2014 photos, So that sort of distinction to me doesn't make much sense. I've heard commercial work versus personal work. Now that seems to make sense on the surface, except, now tell me honestly, personal, what would that include, like family vacation? If a stock photo agency offered you big money for some of those pictures from the family vacation, they're going to become commercial images really quickly, aren't they? Right? I mean, So to me, it makes the most sense. Again, for me personally, it doesn't necessarily make sense for everyone, but it makes sense for me to have all of my photos in a single catalog. That way, I always know where my images are. They're in that one catalog. There are all sorts of reasons you might consider more, but generally speaking, I find that a single catalog works best. Also, you might find a situation. Now, this is where I tell you what I should do or what I do, and then I go on to tell you that that's not how I actually work. I actually use two catalogs, even though I just got finished telling you that I only use one catalog. I'm a huge advocate for one catalog containing all of it. Yes, but I also travel a lot. And so while I'm traveling, I usually don't bring my big 4 terabyte hard drive with me, and so it makes sense to have a traveling catalog with a traveling hard drive so that I'm downloading images while I'm traveling and I'm adding keywords and I'm assigning star ratings, etc. while I'm on the road. When I get home now, I want to merge them. So you might have a one-time need to merge your catalogs because you use multiple catalogs and you decided that you shouldn't have. Or you might have an ongoing situation where you're traveling and you create a brand new catalog for that trip, then you get home and you want to merge it. So let's take a look at that process. In theory, this is so simple, but there's one little bit of a rub that can create a challenge. Theoretically, so easy. All you need to do to merge catalogs is to merge them, but is to make sure that the catalogs are available. So let's assume that we have two catalogs and we're going to merge them into one. I need both catalogs to be available, and I need the photos to be available. So just for simplicity and to try to have a good, clear picture of this, we're going to assume a scenario where I was traveling, and so I put some photos into a traveling catalog on a traveling hard drive, and now I need to merge them with my main catalog on my primary storage hard drive. All right? This could also be, in reality, in this case, I'm using a catalog that was ostensibly from 2013 versus one that was ostensibly from 2014, and I want to merge them together. But the point is that it's actually super, super simple if you meet that criteria. Both catalogs and both storage locations, let's call it both hard drives, are connected to the computer. All of that information is available from the same computer at the same time. If you meet that criteria, it is so simple. Getting to that point might be slightly challenging because you might, for example, have your traveling catalog on the internal hard drive of your computer and the photos on an external hard drive. So now you need to copy the catalog or export the photos and then bring that external hard drive to your other computer. There are some possible minor, relatively speaking, complications involved there. But the point being is that once you have everything in place, it's really simple. So for our purposes, we've been looking at this photo storage folder that contains the images that we've been looking at thus far today. And we also have a folder that we've not been paying attention to, and that is the More Photo Storage folder, which happens to contain a catalog and also a couple of individual folders. This could be my traveling stuff. Maybe this is an external hard drive where I have my catalog plus my photos. I might have had to copy the catalog, etc. But point being is I have what's sort of pretending to be two different hard drives, both connected to my computer, and it includes two different catalogs, two different sets of images. So now that I have everything available to me at one computer, I've opened my master catalog, my primary Lightroom catalog. The next step is super, super simple, I promise. I'm going to go up to the File menu, and I'm going to choose the Import from Another Catalog option. Import from another catalog, because remember, the catalog contains all sorts of information about my images. If I forgot to turn on the option for that traveling catalog to automatically write the XMP, the metadata out to the XMP sidecar files, then the catalog is the only place where my keywords and my star ratings and all that good stuff are actually stored. So I want to use the catalog as the basis of this import. I'm essentially merging two catalogs together. So again, File, Import from Another Catalog. Now we have to go find that catalog, which in this case happens to be inside this little folder. So wherever it might be, probably it's an external hard drive at this point, I imagine. And I go find that LRCat file. LRCat standing for Lightroom Catalog, pretty straightforward there. All right, so I click the Choose button. We'll make this bigger so that we can see, kind of do a check of the images. So what do we want to import from that other catalog? Everything. Everything. So all folders, and they're selected by default, so you can see it was my More Photo Storage folder, and then an Austria 2014 folder, and in the same location, a Slovenia Drive folder. But I just want everything. All of the images represented by that other catalog I want to bring into my primary catalog. And then and you'll see here I get a reference to 60 photos grand total. Obviously for a real trip it'd probably be a lot more photos than just that. And so then file handling. Do I want to add the new photos to the catalog without moving, leave them where they are, but bring them in the catalog? No. Because I still want all of my pictures all in the same place. So I have this traveling external hard drive. I want to copy the photos from there to my primary photo storage location. Just as I prefer to have a single catalog, I prefer to have a single hard drive that contains all of my photos so that I don't have to stop and think about where my photos might be, or try to divide my folders up across multiple hard drives, etc. So far, thankfully, hard drive capacity has grown at a rate that is keeping up with my photography. I'm up to just shy of 4 terabytes of storage right now. I'm getting close to having to fill it up. Thankfully, they already have hard drives bigger than that, so I'm okay. At some point, I might have to slow down in my photography because I'll outpace the hard drives. I hope not. All right. But there are then other options, yes, of course. So then I'm going to copy the photos to a new location. Which location? I'm going to choose that location, and I want to choose the top level location. So the hard drive itself, for example, in this case it's a folder pretending to be a hard drive, but I just want to choose the top level location because these folders will be then copied into that location. All right, the folder structure will be retained, in other words. I also like to do just a quick check. Does this seem to be all of the pictures that I'm importing? All the pictures captured on, in this case, one big trip through Austria and Slovenia. Yes, this looks like it's everything. I'll go ahead and click the import button. And there's essentially two things happening now. All of the information from that other catalog is being imported into my main catalog, and all of the photos from that more photo storage location are being copied to the primary storage location. All right, so now I have not only the photos copied to the correct location, but also all of the metadata. So in this case, these images have a 1-star rating, and let's go up here. I don't even know. Yes, these have some keywords. So here's some photos from Vienna, Austria, and that one doesn't have a keyword for no good reason. And this doesn't have a keyword either, but you get the idea here that all of the information. Now I know what you're thinking. It's not, can I get a print of that photo so that I can hang it on the wall? It's where was that? So we'll just click. Actually, I'm not connected to the internet, so I can't show you that anyway. But the point being is all the metadata. So here I've got the GPS coordinates that are included, and what other information? Keywords. I don't think I have any color labels. The adjustments. So this image was adjusted, for example, in the develop module. You can see the little, or you can barely see the little icon down here, the badge that indicates that it was adjusted. This one has some adjustments as well as, I can't see, that's too small. But you get the idea. Everything that I did to my pictures in that other catalog came along for the ride. So all the keywords that I assigned on the flight home and all the star ratings that I assigned and all the adjustments I applied in the develop module, all of it comes with. I've really merged all of that information from the original traveling catalog to my master catalog at home. So that is tremendously wonderful. Well, what about the photos on that traveling hard drive? Delete them in theory. However, that's scary. I haven't backed up my photos yet. And even if I had backed up the photos, let's not forget that they include pictures of trucks viewed from behind on the highway on a snowy day in Slovenia. We want to make sure these photos are backed up. So right now, in theory, I might only have 2 copies of my pictures, the original traveling copy and now my merged copy. I want to make sure they're safe. So in the short term, I might actually not erase the photos because we don't want to put these pictures at risk, do we? I mean, do you see the sign? Look, see the name? Ljublja. Anybody? Ljubljana, very good. It looks worse than it is. So what would I actually do? Well, in this case, I have all of those photos in a folder, so I could just rename the folder. I could also create a separate folder and drag and drop. I'm just going to rename, and I would just say something like backup. When that hard drive starts getting full, then I might go, oh, backup. Oh, the Slovenia drive photos? Well, we better keep those around. But the Austria backup, but no, we might want to then keep them for a little while until I've had a chance to back up my primary hard drive and take that backup to a separate physical location, or whatever it is that my backup procedure calls for. Point being, I might not delete those photos right away. In theory, I could, and in theory, I have a backup from when I was traveling also. But I usually, especially right after you come back from a trip, you feel like those were the best photos ever. The trucks, they were so big, and there was lots of snow, and the realism of having a wet windshield photographing through. But then after a little while, you start to realize, wait, they're just pictures of snow on the road, and more snow. You have to realize, though, I might live in New York. I was born in California. So I get really excited when there's snow. So, I did apologize at the beginning to those who hadn't seen me before, right? Okay, good. All right, so what happens when we want to move photos? So I keep talking about this, having all of my photos on one hard drive. What happens when I fill up that drive and now I need to move them somewhere else? Actually, possibly pretty simple. Possibly pretty simple. Depends on the platform. My preferred approach, forget about Lightroom. I know we're supposed to do everything inside of Lightroom, but that's not always possible. When it comes to getting a new drive, so I've got a 4 terabyte hard drive that's just totally full, and I have to go out and buy a new 6 terabyte hard drive. What am I going to do? I don't want to have 2 separate locations. I want all the photos in one place, so I want to copy the photos from the smaller drive, the older drive you might say, to the new drive. How will I do that? I know there are a couple of photographers out there who would just go to the operating system, open up the old drive, select all, drag and drop to the new drive. I'm not entirely comfortable with that approach. So instead, I use synchronization software. I love synchronization software. By synchronizing my drive, the first time I'm taking a full drive and copying everything on that drive to an empty drive. From that point forward, every time I tell it to synchronize, it's updating. Hey, what's new or changed since the last time it was backed up? I do this every night. Well, not every night, but every night when I've actually been working that day. So about once a week, I actually synchronize so that all the updates from one. Now, a caveat about synchronizing as your backup. If, hypothetically speaking, you make a mistake and you delete some photos from your primary drive, and then you synchronize, you just synchronized your mistake. You just deleted the photos from your backup drive. It is possible that you can have the synchronization software retain those backup copies for a period of time. For example, I prefer that my backup drive be an exact copy of my master drive so that when that hard drive fails, the primary drive fails, I just slip the backup into place, and then I go buy another backup hard drive to make a new backup and synchronize again. So synchronization to me is just an absolutely perfect solution for backup. It's got a caveat, but if you're careful about it, works wonderfully. I use a piece of software called GoodSync. Works perfectly well. There's a couple other options out there as well, though, that do a great job. And so I would just synchronize. Plug in both drives, synchronize. It'll take a while if it's 4 terabytes, but once that process is complete, then I would just simply disconnect the other drive. So let's just kind of fake this a little bit. Here's my photo storage, and I'm actually just going to make a new folder, and we'll call this New Drive. And I'm just going to select all of these. Now we're going to pretend like we're going to use synchronization software. I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way that I don't recommend, and I'll drag and drop, but in this case I'm going to copy. I'll make sure that I'm copying from one location to another. That'll take, how many gigs? 4 gigs. That'll take a minute. But I'm now copying the photos. You can see the folders are starting to show up there from my smaller drive to the new larger drive, just copying. Pretty straightforward. So you can copy manually, which I'm doing now just for sake of expediency. Again, I recommend using synchronization software. I think it just makes a lot more sense. A lot less prone to error. If you ever try and select things, you didn't quite select everything, or drag and drop didn't drop in the right place. I'm just speaking hypothetically, but it's happened. And so first I'm going to copy. Well, conceptually, wait a minute. Now Lightroom's going to be confused, and I need to make sure that I'm in the right place, et cetera, et cetera. That is true. I'm going to let this finish. At this point, though, it's actually not as bad as it seems, especially for Macintosh users, but also for Windows users, not such a big issue. Basically, what we need to do is make sure that the new drive looks like the old drive to the operating system. So the old drive, I might, in this case, I'm just going to put an X in front of the name again, pretending, oops, I don't know why I did that. We'll try that again. There we go. So I'm just going to rename. That's pretending like I disconnected my external hard drive. That's the old drive, the smaller one that I'm now replacing. Because then what I want to do is rename the new drive to match. What was it called? Photo storage. What's the new drive probably called? Probably untitled, because that's the default on Macintosh. But then literally on the Macintosh platform, I can just, as I rename a folder, I can rename a hard drive, and I want to give it the exact same name as the drive I'm replacing. Remember, I've disconnected that other drive, and now I'm renaming the new drive so that it has the exact same name. If you're a Windows user, the equivalent is the drive letter. So your drive letter C is the drive that your operating system is installed on, for example. Maybe your external hard drive is D or E or F or whatever. Make sure that you assign a drive letter to the new drive that matches what the old drive used to be. Point being is that to Lightroom, it looks the same. So I've disconnected the old drive, I made the new drive have the same name or drive letter as the case may be, depending on your operating system, and now, magically, Lightroom can find everything. Because it's in the same place. All those folders have the exact same name because I copied them, word for word you might say, and now the drive itself looks to be the same because I either used the exact same drive letter on Windows or I used the exact same, it's called a volume label, but basically the name of the drive on the Macintosh platform. How easy is that? Plus, when all those files are copying from your 4 terabyte hard drive to your 6 terabyte hard drive, you kind of have to leave it alone, right? I mean, you don't want to mess with stuff when you're copying photos, so it's good, a little forced vacation. Go out and take some pictures, get a sandwich, whatever the case may be. Now, what happens if you want to move a catalog? Why might you want to move a catalog? Well, for example, if you tend to travel a lot, you might want to put your catalog on an external hard drive so that you have the catalog plus the photos all available all at the same time no matter where you go, rather than having it on a laptop, for example. It depends. You might want to have it on a different computer, etc. So there's all sorts of reasons why you might want to move the catalog. First, you have to know where the catalog is. So I'm going to go to the Lightroom menu and go to Catalog Settings. That would be Edit Catalog Settings on the Windows version. And that brings up this dialog that we looked at the beginning of the presentation. And on the General tab, notice we have that Show button. I don't have to remember the folder structure. I can just say, go ahead and show me that. And here is the folder structure. There's all my other stuff too. This is photo storage, that's the backup. So here is that folder structure. This is the catalog that I'm using, and I'm just going to drag and drop, and in this case I'm moving it. Obviously, normally I might actually copy it and then have a backup, etc. And now I've got this folder called Lightroom 2013 Catalog. And it's in a completely different location from where it was originally. How do you suppose Lightroom's going to feel about that? So I launch Lightroom, and it says, hey, wait just a minute. I can't find the catalog. Now, this underscores the importance. In my case, I took a shortcut and moved the catalog folder. What I would probably do under normal circumstances is copy, but then rename the original. Put the word backup at the beginning of the folder name, for example. So I'm keeping it just in case, but I'm not letting Lightroom be confused. I don't want Lightroom to find the old version of the catalog because I don't want that degree of confusion. So now what am I going to do? Well, I'll simply choose a different catalog, and I will choose a different catalog, and then I will navigate to, in this case, the desktop, photo storage, Lightroom 2013 catalog, and there is my catalog. And then I can open it. So I've moved my catalog to an entirely different location, and it's no problem at all. I just have to tell Lightroom where it went. But wait, there's more. What if I want to rename the catalog? Now this one, admittedly, maybe is a little bit silly. Because why do I need to rename the catalog? Easy, because my catalog right now, you remember what it's called? Go to Lightroom Catalog Settings or Edit Catalog Settings. It's called Lightroom 2013 Catalog. That makes no sense. It's not 2013 anymore. So I want to rename the catalog. Well, I can go ahead and show that catalog location again. But again, before I actually make that change, I'm going to quit Lightroom. So Lightroom's not running. I can rename the folder if I'd like. I'll just take out the 2013. But that's not the hard part. Well, the next part's not that hard either, but it's more particular. When I open up that folder, you'll see that the catalog actually consists of potentially multiple files. The previews image at the preview images file at the very least, but also possibly smart previews, for example. What I need to do is rename all of those images, all those files in exactly the same way. Basically, the Lightroom catalog file becomes kind of your base file name structure. It can be anything you want dot lrcat. Could be called anything you like dot lrcat. The other files have to have the anything you like part plus something extra plus lrcat. It's simple in theory, but boy, it's easy to make a mistake here. So you've got to be a little bit careful. I'm going to go ahead and just rename that Lightroom 2013 catalog file. What shall we call it?
Lightroom catalog.
Lightroom catalog. See, Tim's catalog. That's nicer. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? All right, so Tim's catalog. I'm going to select that text, just the Tim's catalog part, everything before the period, the dot, and I'm just going to copy it to make my life a little bit easier. And then I go to the previews file, and I need to keep the previews part. Now again, there's possibly a smart previews file if I've generated any smart previews, so I might have to repeat this for the other files. But I just want to select the part before previews and use the same name. So Tim's catalog space previews.lr data in this case, not lrcat. Simple in concept, easy to make a mistake, but the point is that I want to make sure that they have the exact same basic file name structure, if you will. And then I will launch Lightroom, and now what's it going to do? Man, it's going to get angry. It can't find the catalog. What am I going to do? I'm going to choose a different catalog, navigate to that catalog. And so we've got it inside of photo storage, inside the, now without the word, or the 2013, the number 2013 is part of it. So it's just Tim's catalog, choose, and then open, and Lightroom launches. Fingers crossed. Oh, look, it worked. I mean, and of course, it worked. Yes, sir?
Why didn't you do this within Lightroom?
Why didn't I rename the catalog within Lightroom? Because it doesn't let me. Yeah, I wish that it would let me just rename the catalog right there so that I don't have to worry about all those individual additional names. But unfortunately, not possible. All right, so there you have it. Fortunately, we have the room here for about another just more than 15 minutes. I imagine that I've answered every single question you could possibly have when it relates to keeping your photos organized and solving problems in Lightroom, but I'm more than happy to stick around and answer questions. In the meantime, thank you very much, everybody.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.